All right, so let's look at the second part of this presentation and looking at IDEA. So we've just come off of what the elements are within the law, and now as an appropriations law, as a law that has money attached to it. Some of that money is permanent and is perpetuated and funded until the law is revoked in some way, but other parts of those funds have to be reauthorized periodically. So over the life of IDEA, there have been several amendments, as well as certain elements added during that reauthorization process. And 2004 was the most recent reauthorization, and there were several things that were added in this space, and I'm going to highlight four of them right here to talk about, because I think they're four that were pretty important in the way in which we address and look at special education law in practice in schools. So, the first, there were some changes around the IEP, and the changes really were about trying to help make it easier. If you had if you had a student that had lots of various services, but there weren't any changes in a particular service, or there was a meeting to address a specific service, all the other participants didn't have to be a part of the meeting now. So we've made it a little bit easier on folks that way. We used to hand parents procedural safeguards every time and make them sign that they'd received them. Now there's an option that we've offered them, and they've declined to take them, and they can sign that they declined to take them, and that's a reduction in paper. One of the greatest changes out of 2004 that I experienced was the fact that if we needed to make a change to the IEP, say we had a case conference in October and now it's January, and so October we did our annual case review, we updated the IEP, everything's hunky-dory, and we get to January and there's a change that we want to make. It used to be we had to reconvene the entire case conference committee and make that change, and now that there's an option for the school and the parents to have communication and create addenda and modifications to the IEP, and the parents can agree to that over the phone, through email. We don't have to have that full case conference committee meeting. Sometimes it's important to have that meeting, other times, but it's not always necessary. So those are nice things within that process. An area that is of really a lot of interest, and I know at least one, maybe more of you are looking at this as a potential topic for your research paper, is this notion of disciplining students with special education. So there was a reauthorization before the 2004 was 1987, and it also gave a little bit greater freedom around disciplining students. And the basic rules are that you can discipline a student with special needs and make arbitrary changes in placement, meaning remove them from the school setting for 10 days. And that's a cumulative 10 days. So we pay attention to the way in which we suspend students with special needs. I need to go through and look at the new rules for Ohio. When the new rules came out in Indiana, it was possible to go to an 11th day as long as the behaviors were not of the same pattern. So for example, if I had a student that was having tardy issues, and then they got into a fight, and then I busted them for being stoned, those three behaviors are not forming a pattern, and so in Indiana I would have been able to suspend them an 11th, 12th, or 13th day. I was able to go beyond the 10 days, but 10 days is considered to be the max. And if we go beyond the 10 days, we have to have this manifestation determination hearing. And what this hearing really is all about is deciding whether the behaviors are caused by the student's disability, or if the student's IEP has been fully implemented. And if we can say that the behaviors are not related to disability. So we have a student with a specific learning disability in reading, and they go and punch somebody in the face in the cafeteria. We can say those two things are not related. We can look at the IEP and see that we've implemented the IEP fully. We're now able to then, there's not a relationship between the behaviors and the disability, or the behaviors and the implementation of the IEP, and as a result, we can now discipline the student. In the 97 reauthorization, there was the creation of a 45-day alternative placement that was used for drug offenders and weapons offenders. That was expanded to anyone causing bodily harm. So again, kids get into fights or those kinds of things can be used in can be placed in a 45-day alternative placement. There's a notion of stay put within special education, which means that while we're having a dispute, the student stays put. So if the parents are contesting the discipline, under the old rules, the stay put provision would have kept them in school. So we could have used our 10 days of suspension. On the 11th day, if it wasn't resolved, the student would have been back in class. Then potentially, once it was resolved, removed from school. Now the stay put provision says if they are eligible for the 45-day placement, if their behaviors are eligible for 45-day placement, that while the discipline is being contested, the alternative placement is where they stay put. They don't go back to the regular classroom. This again, if it's a drug dealing or a weapons charge, while you're going through this process of the hearing and making sure what's happening, it's important for us to try to maintain safety in the school, and Congress responded to that. The one thing that is important to note, though, is that while a student with special needs is disciplined, they still have access to educational services. And this used to be a really big difference, especially at the high school level. When we would expel a kid, we would expel them. And they'd be gone, and they would not have the opportunity to earn credits or make progress to graduation or anything else. But if we expelled a special ed kid, they would then still have the opportunity to receive credits and make progress towards graduation. But with what I saw happening as we saw the change in the rules around graduation rate, and graduation rate being used for accreditation, and that definition of graduation rate coming to a 4-year cohort rate, we stopped excluding any kid from making educational progress while they were in school. And I don't know what that's going to look like right there. I'm sorry, my screensaver came on. So we would allow students, gen ed kids that were expelled, have opportunities to make progress to graduation, because we didn't want to damage their chances of graduating in 4 years and meeting the 4-year cohort rate. So it's a little bit different now. Dispute resolution. So the 2004 reauthorization put in some limits on when parents can request and engage in due process. This was to try to help not allow litigations to drag on and on and on and on. And then also a resolution step was added. So if there's a dispute, the school and the parents can agree to sit down and try to have a resolution session. And this would be done before the case goes to a mediator, which is non-binding, or into due process and a due process hearing officer, which is binding. So it's another opportunity to try to resolve things before we get to those more expensive outside spaces. This is another really important space here, and I'm looking at my timing, and I've got about 6 minutes left total in the video, and I'm hoping that we can get through what I have left here, and I think we can. But just so you know, if I start talking fast, that's why. So, eligibility. In 2004, the way in which we determined eligibility changed. The first thing was that any party can request evaluation. So it used to be that it was parents requesting of the school to evaluate their kid. Now the school can request of the parents, because again, in an accountability world, it's important that if we think we have a student with special needs who might be able to receive accommodations, say on the state test or on a, well, in particular on the state test, it's to our advantage for them to have as many advantages as possible for them to perform well on the test, so we now can request. But before eligibility can be determined, we also have to look at the educational program has to be evaluated. Are we using top quality math and reading programming? Are they scientifically researched? And I would be giving you the air quotes on that, and that's a whole nother story. We use that word a lot, and I'm not sure that people really know what it means, but that's a different story. And then the eligibility for specific learning disabilities really got changed. We used to use a discrepancy model, which would say that we take a kid's IQ and then take a kid's achievement, and if their innate ability, their IQ, and their academic achievement were disparate enough, they would then be eligible for services. And the law no longer allows states for specific learning disability to use only the discrepancy model. And instead, it's about a response, and this has given rise to the response to intervention. And the notion is, again, it's almost like this extension of the least restrictive environment in my mind. We make sure that we place them in, we provide quality instruction, we make sure that we provide quality interventions at the lowest level possible, and then if those don't work, then we ratchet up the level of intervention, with special ed placement being the greatest level. And so it's an important thing to note in how that operates. All right, so funding and enforcement of special education law. So the federal goal was never to provide 100% funding, but to provide 40% funding for the implementation of the education for students with special needs across the country, and we've never met that. But there have been attempts across the history of the law to get closer to that, and all those kinds of things. Enforcement comes from the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programming. And it's really enforcement from the federal to the state level, and the states are required to monitor local schools. So these are kind of funding enforcement, and that was the tail end of Chapter 4. So Chapter 7 I'm going to spend very little time on, mainly because my video is almost out, and 2, because we know a lot about these laws because we live them, and I just want to look at them briefly. So ESEA, brief history. The initial ESEA is in 1965. It was part of President Johnson's War on Poverty, and it was Title I. Title I is the big legacy out of that, right? In 1983, Nation at Risk really started to question whether schools were doing what they should be doing. Goals 2000 and 1996, the first federal mention of state standards. And then 2001 was a reauthorization of ESEA, which became No Child Left Behind in 2001 and the current accountability law. For special education and NCLB, where they really intersect, highly qualified teachers, teacher professional development, and qualifications and training for paraprofessionals. There's a lot of dispute, and there was a lot of dispute when NCLB was first passed about who was tested, who could be excluded, and that's also a big component here. But I don't remember really seeing that deeply studied or discussed in the text. So that's another element. That's an important thing to note. So there is the part 2 of our presentation for session 4, and we will see you next week.